Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Pearl, and I'm the director of the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. I'm delighted to welcome everyone here today. We're going to have a very special conversation with three individuals, 2 alumni fellows and 1 current fellow, all of whom are faculty members who took a sabbatical or leave of absence to become an STPF fellow. They'll share what it was like to step away from campus to spend a year in Washington working on science policy. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to our panelists. Over the next hour together, we'll introduce our 3 panelists. I'll provide an overview of the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships program, and we'll spend the majority of our time together having a moderated discussion with the panelists. I'll conclude by sharing a few resources to learn more about STPF following the webinar. First, let me introduce ConSandra McNeil. ConSandra is a second-year fellow at the National Science Foundation in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Currently on professional leave of absence from the Department of Criminal Justice and Sociology at Jackson State University, with over 20 years of higher education experience. Her interests are in STEM education and research, minority health disparities, gender disparities, and public health issues. Second, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jessica Libertini. And I think that Jessica is joining us by audio, but not necessarily by video right now. She was an STPF fellow in the U.S. Department of Defense, Office of the Director of International Cooperation. Dr. Libertini holds advanced degrees in mechanical engineering and applied mathematics, and is currently on the faculty at Virginia Military Institute. Her primary research focus is on STEM education at the undergraduate level, and she's also actively involved in disciplinary research in mathematical modeling, including work in global food systems and nutrition security. Finally, I'd like to introduce Chris Schaffer. Chris is an associate professor in the Manning School of Biomedical Engineering at Cornell University. He received his degree in physics from Harvard University, and he served in 2012 to 2013 in Congress in the office of then Congressman Ed Markey, sponsored by the Optical Society and the International Society for Optical Engineering. Thank you all for being here. I really look forward to our conversation and learning more about your experience as fellows. Before we begin our discussion, I do want to provide a brief overview about the S&T Policy Fellowships. And Jessica, I'm delighted that you've joined us in the picture as well as in audio. Okay. The Science and Technology Policy Fellowships is a program of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS. Many people know AAAS as the publisher of the journal Science. Our mission is to advance science, engineering, and innovation throughout the world for the benefit of all people. Across the organization, focus areas include advocacy for evidence, shaping science policy, science diplomacy, and much more. It's easy to see why this fellowship has its home here at AAAS. Why do we operate the Science Policy Fellowships? It's mutually beneficial. Good science and technology information is critical to developing good policies. The agencies and offices where fellows are placed to gain access to talented scientists and engineers like you. Fellows gain firsthand experience in how the federal policy system operates, and sometimes doesn't, and an understanding of how science can support decision-making and implementation. We're building a community of leaders from a broad range of science and technical realms who can accurately assess and effectively communicate the importance and implications of science. To give you a sense of the magnitude of the opportunity, here we have the current 2019-2020 AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship class. The picture represents 273 unique experiences. It showcases scientists and engineers from across disciplines, career stages, and sectors, all contributing their skill set and training to policy issues. There are a number of faculty in this photo, including ConSandra. The fellowship program has placements in 4 different areas. I'll briefly describe each of them to you now. The executive branch. This is the branch where Jessica and ConSandra are placed as fellows. Fellowship opportunities in the executive branch are the most numerous of the 4 fellowships. Many of the folks in the previous photo were placed in the executive branch agencies, such as the U.S. Agency for International Development, the National Science Foundation, the Department of State, National Institutes of Health, Department of Energy, and NASA, to name a few. These fellows contribute to policy, administration, and implementation in federal agencies. The legislative branch. Congressional fellows spend a year on Capitol Hill helping to research, develop, and draft legislation. They provide input to policy review and oversight. AAAS sponsors 2 congressional placements each year, and additional placements are available through approximately 30 scientific partner societies, like the Optical Society, which sponsored Chris. Individuals are encouraged to apply for a AAAS-sponsored fellowship placement, as well as any partner societies for which they qualify. The judicial branch. AAAS places 1 fellow in the Federal Judicial Center each year. This fellow spends a year contributing science and technical expertise to judicial administration, operations, education programs, protocol discovery, or courtroom technology, while learning firsthand about contemporary policy issues facing the judiciary. The FJC trains federal judges, so this is a very important posting. And finally, the Roger Revelle Fellowship. The Revelle Fellow in Global Stewardship is designed to provide a unique opportunity for an accomplished scientist to address global stewardship issues by applying their broad, multidisciplinary background towards solutions to important societal problems. The fellowship is only open to applicants with 7 years of post-degree professional experience, and anticipated placement opportunities include anywhere in the federal government or environmental or sustainability-oriented nonprofit or international organization of the fellow's choosing. If you're passionate about global stewardship, this may be the placement for you. I want to be really clear that with the 4 different branches, there are a lot of executive branch placements. There are 2 AAAS congressional placements, and then there are probably about 30 other placements from other sponsoring organizations. The judicial placement is 1 fellow, and the Revelle Fellowship is 1 fellow. So while we encourage applications to all of these tracks, we really encourage folks to also apply to the executive branch if it's of interest to you, because that is where you'll have the best chances. Okay, so what are the criteria for a fellow? What do we look for when we look at applications? You might be thinking, what does AAAS look for, and do we really want someone like you? The answer is yes, absolutely. We're looking for individuals with strong science and technical expertise, leadership, communication, and analytical skills. We find that faculty who have honed these skills through their careers and are science and technical experts in their fields make for excellent fellows and have much to contribute. What is the timeline? Well, our application window is open, and we're currently accepting applications through November 1st for fellowship placements in the class of 2021-2022. So the application window that is open now through November 1st will be to place fellows who will start in September of 2021. So if you have an upcoming sabbatical in 2021 or are able to plan for a leave of absence that year, you might want to apply now. And then you can see here the calendar for the review of applications and the interview schedule and the time in which offers are made. So now that we have a shared understanding of the fellowship, I'd like to begin our conversation with ConSandra, Jessica, and Chris. Thank you all for being here. Okay, first question. Are you all ready?
Yes.
Thumbs up? Okay. This is a question I'm going to ask Jessica to answer first. Jessica, when did you first learn about the fellowship, and when did you apply? Was there something that spurred you to apply at that time in your career?
Okay, great. I just needed to unmute myself. So I first heard about it when I was finishing my PhD back in 2008, so it's been a while. I applied at that point, but I was not accepted. But I'm not sure I was really ready anyway. So the fellowship was in the back of my mind throughout this time period, and then I wasn't sure whether I would apply or not going forward, but I had just done a lot of curriculum development work for a new set of courses, big major core courses at my institution, and I was starting to get burnt out and we were getting ready to launch the courses. And I thought, I just need a year of doing something really different. And this seemed like an opportunity for me to do something that was still exciting and useful and would add value, especially since I'm at a military institution, to be able to come back and talk about leadership from that perspective. It just seemed like the perfect fit. And so I applied and I got it.
Great. Chris, can you talk about that from your perspective? When did you learn about the fellowship? When did you apply? And why was that the right time for you?
Yeah, for me, I guess I've always sort of envisioned science as the career I wanted to have, but I've always been kind of like an armchair politics wonk, you know, devouring the papers and screaming at it when I'm unhappy and cheering when I am. But as I progressed as a scientist, and I learned about the fellowship when I was a graduate student, I think as many of us do. But I didn't have a career stage where it felt like the right time. Coming out of grad school, I had a really nice postdoc lined up. I was excited about the work. Coming out of my postdoc, I got a faculty position at a university I was excited about, so it didn't make sense then either. So I waited until my first sabbatical, and that's when I finally kind of dove in and applied.
Great. How about you, ConSandra?
Well, can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay. So I learned about the fellowship through a former fellow and a current fellow. I was on a panel at NSF, on a review panel, and I saw this young lady sitting there, and I started conversating with her, and she said that I'm a AAAS fellow, and I think you should apply. And so because I thought at that time, being 20 years into my profession, that there was nothing, you know, out there that I could apply for. And so she sent me the paperwork and application. I just started submitting. I submitted my application, and she mentored me through the entire process of the application, which was great.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to ask our panelists to talk about their fellowship placements. Where were your placements, and what unique contributions did you bring to your fellowship placement as a faculty member and in your particular area of expertise? So Chris, would you take that first?
Sure. Like Jennifer said, I was one of the Congressional Fellows. With the Congressional Fellows, you move down to DC in early September, and AAAS puts on a kind of a 2-week-long how does the government work crash course. Is actually, I found it extremely helpful. And at the end of that, you're sort of like a free agent, and you try to identify a congressional office to affiliate with. It felt very much like being a graduate student trying to find a research advisor at, you know, an institution or a department you had come to. So in that process, there's a bunch of individual offices in the House and the Senate, personal offices, as well as some of the committees that will advertise that they're looking for fellows. In addition, you're not constrained just to offices that are advertising for fellows. My year, there was a couple of fellows who went and, you know, there was some reason they felt an affinity toward a particular office, and they went and convinced them that they should take a fellow. Anyway, once you've identified a pool of fellows, it's kind of a mutual matchmaking process. So I, you know, sent resumes to 20 or 30 places. I interviewed with 15 or 20, follow-up interviews with more, that kind of thing, just kind of gradually trying to find a placement that seemed like it would work well. In my case, I joined Representative Ed Markey's office. He was in the House at that time. That was the year that John Kerry moved from the Senate to the State Department, and that opened up a Senate seat in Massachusetts, which Markey ran for in the primary and then the general election and won. And then moved to the Senate, and I actually moved with him to the Senate during the last third or so of my fellowship. Jennifer, you asked about, you know, where were there cases where my specific expertise as a faculty member or a scientist became relevant. I'll be honest, there was one single meeting where my specific expertise and my specific, you know, kind of disciplinary knowledge really mattered. There was another meeting where me being a physicist and having that degree mattered. But mostly the sort of knowledge and capabilities that I think we have as scientists and as faculty, it mostly came through in research synthesis. So the ability to just read lots and lots of materials, distill a coherent understanding of how these things fit together, and then to explain that coherent understanding to someone else in conversations and in writing. That was something that you know, I love doing. It's a core part of your job as an academic, and it's one of the dominant tasks that I would say I found myself doing, and it felt so natural doing it. It was just, you know, it was different papers and different knowledge, but in terms of the process, it felt very natural for me.
Thanks, Chris. Cassandra, how about you?
Well, I'm at the National Science Foundation, and I'm in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And like Chris just mentioned, it felt natural. I work with external program compliance. Once the grants are funded, the grants must stay in compliance with NSF compliance laws. You have Title IX compliance laws, you have civil rights compliance, Title VI, you have disability, and you have age discrimination, and a recent term and condition on sexual harassment. So I was a vice president of faculty senate at my institution. So I knew all the academic policies and procedures. So I was able to help my office out a lot. Being the first fellow in my office was a little bit trial. It was a trial era, because it was like, okay, you know, I had to really show where I fit in terms of policies in my office. And as I mentioned, being a faculty senate president, vice president, I knew all the academic policies. So they really relied on me to assist them with program complaints, helping them figure out how academicians think. I went on 2 Title IX site visits when we interviewed PIs, co-PIs, students, and the like. I analyzed the data from the site visit. I led my office with the new term and condition, with the co-evaluation of the new term and condition. So my contribution has been major in my office. And now I'm about a month and a half out my fellowship, and I'm working on D&I strategies. Been a sociologist. Now with the George Floyd and the social unrest, so they have really relied on me to look at the strategies and where NSF can go in the next 4 years. So I've been able to make major contributions in my office and outside of my office as well.
Thank you, Cassandra. How about you, Jessica?
So I was in the Department of Defense, which is sort of fitting given that I'm at a military school. I was in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition. At the time that I was brought in, it was the Undersecretary for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, but Congress mandated a split, and so Undersecretary Lord became the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment. I stayed with her, although I also ended up supporting the Undersecretary for Research and Development, since that was the split that happened. And I was in the Office of International Cooperation. That meant it was a country desk officer. I had a portfolio of 8 different countries from around the world. My job was to be the expert in our international partnerships with those 8 different countries. I had to ramp up on that really quickly because I was only there for a year. That meant that anytime any of the senior leaders, either of those 2 undersecretaries or the Secretary of Defense himself, had questions about any of our partnerships, I was the person that was the knowledgeable expert. There's a lot of coordinating senior office calls at the Pentagon, a lot of event planning, meeting agendas, read-aheads, just making sure that our senior leaders were prepared for those engagements, as well as having a lot of meetings with my counterparts at embassies. It was a lot of international travel. I think I won't say that I hold the record because there might be somebody who's done better, but I managed to go to Singapore twice, Indonesia, and the Netherlands, all on my fellowship money by stretching it very wisely. Yeah. In addition, and I went to Hawaii and I went to Portland, Oregon. So all on my fellowship dollars, very wisely spent. In terms of my background, what was good, I actually had worked in the Department of Defense before, working on submarines and missile defense. So I knew a lot of the terminology and I knew what I didn't know. So that made me brave enough to ask. And having been faculty at West Point and VMI, I'm familiar with military customs and cultures. And I think that amongst our DoD fellows, even if I hadn't been there, there were a couple other fellows who had DoD experience, and we were all able to rely on one another. So even the people coming in that didn't have that background, they had somebody to talk to about it. But more generally, as a faculty member, I already knew how to be independent. I knew how to demonstrate that I was competent, yet willing to ask for help when I needed it. So the office could trust me with really big responsibilities, like traveling with the undersecretary and being her primary point of contact. But then there was one thing in my background that was actually, I won't say bad, but I had to be humbled. In the academic world, I've considered myself to be a good writer. But when I was writing in that community, like the style of writing was just different, and I had to learn how to write differently. I had to sort of swallow that humility pill of the really long, flowy sentences connecting all of these complex ideas that we love in academia. The Defense Department just wants a declarative statement in, active voice, just, A did B. So I had to, learn that and sort of swallow that pride pill.
Yeah.
And if I could just follow up on that, and in some ways, I think this may relate to a question that's coming up next, like what were some really hard lessons learned? And I had the exact same reaction where writing styles and writing quality was one of the things that I was surprised that I needed to work on quite a bit to be successful in this space. But it was actually for a different reason than what you mentioned, Jessica. So I actually pride myself as a scientific writer. I take a lot of time teaching my graduate students and postdocs and other trainees how to write really high quality scientific paper. And the first op-ed that I was asked to ghostwrite for Representative Markey, I'd used the kind of writing styles that I'm used to, very data-driven, very declarative, those kinds of things. And I handed it to the press secretary for Markey's office, who reminded me of my graduate students at the time. He was a much younger guy, straight out of college. And this draft that I had put together came back just covered from top to bottom with red ink. And at first, I was mad. I was like, who does this person think he is? How does he know, how to write? I've been doing this for years. But it took, as you said, a little bit of humility to realize that, in fact, in this case, writing an op-ed, a distinct emotional appeal was important as a way to grab an audience. Laying out 2 paragraphs of background wasn't the right structure for it. So I had to learn how to write in different kinds of formats. For different kinds of audiences in a way that I don't think many of us are often challenged to write as professional scientists. So I found it a humbling experience, but one that I've learned from enormously.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Go ahead, ConSandra.
Yeah, I guess, this is the next question. Been talking, looking at a lesson learned. It has been a humbling experience for me as well. I have learned how to become a practitioner, to translate theory into practice, and taking the knowledge and skills that I had learned as a faculty member and infusing them into STEM, into federal policy. I'll share a brief story with you. Prior to 3 years before the fellowship, I was in pursuit of IPA, Intergovernment Personnel Act, a rotator position. So I had a informal telephone interview with an agent, with one of the agencies, and they had my vita and they had my cover letter, and they stated that they were impressed by my resume and curriculum vita, and I was waiting for them to tell me what they wanted me to do, but they was waiting for me to tell them what I brought to the table at that time. Of course, I was able to say that I published I presented, I do data analysis, but I could not at that time translate or transfer my academic background to the federal government. So needless to say that I did not get that rotated position at the time. And so I left there, I said, oh my God, I think I've been in academic too long and I'm not able to sell myself outside of the academy. So I had to regroup and to write down my skill set for the federal government. So it took me 2 years, and then I applied for the AAAS fellowship, and it was almost like, so it's the old songs, I can see clearly now the rain is gone. So I can see clearly now that the fog is gone, that I have actually became a practitioner. And just like Chris and Jessica said, it's been a humbling experience because it's been quite different. But just to bring theory into practice, and I know a lot of academicians, we have that. When 20 years in the field, it was hard to bring me to translate it. Now I can go to USA jobs now. I see where I fit in the federal government. I can apply for other positions that 4 or 5 years ago I could not apply for because I could not translate it. So I'd say that's my lesson learned, and it's been a humbling experience as well.
Thank you. One of the things that I think is most special about the fellowship program is that it really opens your eyes to what's possible in the federal government as a scientist or engineer. If someone is, for example, a cancer biologist and they know they want to work at NIH on some type of cancer biology, they don't need to come to the fellowship program. But if they're interested in contributing their skill set to the nation, supporting policy at the federal level, being involved in the decision-making process, and they're open-minded and willing to consider opportunities, then what the fellowship program does is it displays for them all these possibilities. So at the same time, we had an application calendar earlier, how applications are processed and evaluated throughout the year. At the same time as we're talking to prospective applicants, we're also talking to prospective post offices. And we are getting position descriptions from them, and they're telling us what kinds of fellows that they would like. And the last stage of the application process for executive branch fellows is a matching. And also for the Congressional fellows, there's a matching. They take place at different times, but the last part is a matching. And what, in my mind, one of the real values of the program is that as a finalist, you get to interview at all of these different offices. And some of them may be places that you had never thought would be interested in you. You may be right now, for example, we have a computer scientist working at the State Department. We have biology, we have neuroscientists working at the Department of Defense. It's really eye-opening to think about all the different places in the government that might see value in your skill set. So with that, I want to go to Jessica because I interrupted and didn't let you answer the question. So the question is, what was most eye-opening about the fellowship experience?
I loved this question, and it was hard for me to answer because I learned a lot about myself, but they weren't necessarily tangible things. I learned to not only grow in areas that I had been small, but to realize new loves. Like I always was the nerd that wanted to read a book in a corner. I was the kid who disappeared from my own birthday parties to like go read an encyclopedia in my room. But because I was in this office of international cooperation, I was constantly being invited to like embassy balls and having to hobnob and rub elbows with all of these very senior people. And I had to learn how to do that with confidence. And I did. I ended up thriving in that environment, but I also learned that I love that. And it's something that I wouldn't have known about myself. So the fellowship, it forced me into situations that I think otherwise would have been uncomfortable. And now I love them. So.
Great, thank you. Next question. Life on campus does not stop when you're away. I imagine many people listening today will be curious to hear how you manage your research group, student advising, or other activities from afar. Chris, you want to take that one?
Sure. So I run a large research lab. We have in total about 20 people at the graduate student, postdoctoral, or research scientist level. 4 million or so a year in research funding. So it was critically important for me to have a way to be able to make sure I didn't fall down on or fall short of my responsibilities to my trainees and to the work that we had agreed to accomplish in these research grants and things like that. So in my case, I negotiated with Representative Markey's office for me to have a couple hours a day that I spent on phone calls and video conference with people from my lab. And then I would spend a long weekend once a month up in Ithaca and that at Cornell, and that long weekend would just be back-to-back meetings with things with folks from my research group. I had it was a real sabbatical, so I had no teaching, no administrative, no undergraduate student advising responsibilities. The only responsibility I retained at Cornell was for my research lab. I also used that, I used being on sabbatical and in this position to just pull back on all other kinds of traditional service obligations for faculty members. So I didn't accept any reviews for papers or grants or reviewing tenure cases or anything like that. I just told everybody, this year I'm on sabbatical and I'm doing this important work in the United States Congress, and I can't take anything else on. So between carving out a little bit of time every day and a little bit of time every month to focus exclusively on my group and shedding any other academic service and teaching responsibilities, we had a great year in my lab, and I don't think people resented or felt less productive because I was away. There is one thing that I will say, though, that I think many scientists who are running larger research labs will want to work out, and that's how funding is going to work. And my understanding is this is going to be something that needs to be negotiated depending on where you're placed and what agencies are funding you. But the goal, of course, is to avoid either real or apparent conflicts of interest. In my case, because I was in Congress, I worked with the ethics office in Congress, and we worked collaboratively together to come up with a plan. In my case, the plan was that I would continue to administer and run all of the grants that I already had awarded, that I could, before I started working in Representative Markey's office, I could submit grants to federal agencies before I started working with him. I couldn't take any active steps to do anything with grants during the year that I was working with him, so I didn't submit any grants for that year, although the ones I submitted worked through the review process. And then obviously I wrote grants on in my spare time, and as soon as I left then Senator Markey's office, I submitted those grants to federal agencies. So I just think that it's something that, if you're a very grant dependent faculty member, it'd be important to think through and to negotiate early on in the process how your grants, both existing grants and submitted grants, would be handled.
Jessica, how did you handle that?
So I'm at an undergraduate only institution, and so I don't have the big research group to worry about. I had a few undergraduates that were doing projects with me, but those could be handled remotely pretty easily without a lot of time on my part. It was really more like wrapping things up, some summer projects that had spilled into the school year, and I didn't start new projects. I was on an unpaid leave of absence from my institution, so we don't have sabbaticals. But that, because I was on unpaid leave, I didn't have any obligations to the school. But remember, I told you that I had timed this so that this was like the year before we're launching those big courses. So there still was a lot of curriculum development work, finalizing materials for students, finalizing versions of materials for faculty. I was able to take a week off in August to come and run a boot camp for my new faculty instructors who would be teaching these big core courses, multi-section courses. And so that was sort of the extent of my commitment to VMI, and that was something that I definitely negotiated ahead of time with my office as well as with VMI to make sure that that would work out. But I'm also involved a lot with national and international professional organizations. I'm on a lot of committees. I'm on a lot of boards for journals, and so I did manage to keep that up, but again, I didn't have a big research lab to go, to worry about all the time. So I was still able to continue those things. I was able to get, I organized a major conference in my field. I attended several conferences in my field. My book was finally published. I judged a big undergraduate competition, and I wrote quite a few articles. Being in the Department of Defense, I just had to make sure that I showed them my articles, and they usually looked at them and said, this has nothing to do with your office, so you're good to go. I just say, be careful when you're publishing that you make sure that you go through any requirements of your office, because that was a big one for me, was just to make sure that I had that lead time to get permission to publish from DoD. The other thing that is related to this is when I interviewed, I made it very clear that I was only going to be able to stay for 1 year, because while it is a 1-year fellowship, there is a second-year extension in a lot of cases. It has to be mutually agreed upon, and I mean, Jennifer can probably get into more of the nitty-gritty details about that. But I found that when I told certain offices that I was only going to be available for 1 year, they weren't interested. And at first, in the moment, it hurt, right? Like I was like, but they're such a good fit, and in retrospect, I'm so glad I ended up in an office that understood that I wanted to be there for 1 year, that really worked with me to make sure that I got the most out of the 1 year as possible, and at the same time gave me that flexibility to take time off to go and attend conferences in my field. So.
Thank you. ConSandra, how about you? How did you handle leaving your life on campus to come to Washington?
Well, quite well. I took a professional leave of absence unpaid from my university, so I had no obligations to the students or the other curriculum development and so forth. I was on 2 NSF projects, and I relinquished my duties from those projects. I wanted full attention to the fellowship. I did manage to read 4 journals in my field to keep up with the current what's going on. I did mentor some junior faculty members on TMP, but that's, for the most part, that's all I did academically. So it was, I've been 2 years, and I wanted to commit myself totally to my fellowship. It was by choice from that standpoint.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I want to mention also is that as a fellow, you're in really high demand. For the fellows on the Hill, every year my staff canvasses the Hill offices to ask who would like a fellow, and we get requests for about 100 fellows, but with all of our partner societies, we can only support about 30 or 35. So the demand is outpacing the supply by 3 to 1. In the executive branch, just this past session where we had a virtual interview week in April, because of the pandemic, we weren't able to do an in-person interview week, but in the virtual interview week, we had requests for about 300 fellows, and we had about 155 or 160 applicants. So the fellowship program in Washington is really quite well known and highly regarded, and if you come, you will be in high demand. Let's see, how about another question? And this one I will ask first to Jessica. Thinking of your home institution, how did you raise the subject of this fellowship? For example, was it a sabbatical, leave of absence? You talked about this a little bit. You said it was unpaid leave of absence. And how did they respond?
Yeah, so I can tell you, I can give a really good lesson on what not to do. So I asked my dean for a letter of recommendation, which he gladly gave. What I didn't realize is that by doing that early in the process, I had sort of messed a lot up down the line, just because I didn't really understand what my school's policies and procedures were. our leaves of absences are selected by a committee that meets annually way after I needed that letter. So the dean had already given like an illusion of approval for something that he didn't have the authority to approve without support from the committee. And that actually caused me to be persona non grata to some people in the school's administration. There's some people that still talk about the year that I went AWOL, absent without leave. So there were some hiccups there. So I think that, you know, before you start any of the process, it's important to have some conversations with whoever is, you know, whether it's your department chair or whether it's, you know, a mentor that you have formally or informally, but making sure that you really understand the process at your institution and that you're dovetailing with it. It was eventually resolved. And like I said, I was able to take an unpaid leave of absence that was like very specially approved away from the committee. And so, I know that Jennifer, you've got some follow-up questions that get into more of the nitty-gritty details. So I'll save those for if there's time.
I did mine kind of different from Jessica. I moved very quietly, and I only mentioned it to one trusted mentor faculty member on campus who had been a former dean who wrote me a letter of recommendation. And when during interview week with the Affinity group, the Fellows Over 40 group, some of the fellows, potential fellows, asked us that question as well. And because sometime on campus, we know that it's just all depends on what's taking place on campus. If you can take a sabbatical, if you can take a professional leave of absence. And I was ready to take it, but I wasn't ready to have conversation with my chair and with my dean. So I moved very quietly. I don't recommend it, but you have to know the environment on your campus. And so as I moved to the interview week, I started to tell the vice provost, the provost and the vice president of research, so I could have someone to support me. So, but I don't recommend that way, but I just say that know your environment on campus and know what you can do. And please read your policies and procedures. But I had read my policy and procedures before I started the fellowship process. I will say that, but I didn't mention it to my superiors from the chair to the dean until I actually made it to the final process. The final process.
Thank you. And Chris, how about you?
I told everyone what I was hoping and planning to do at every step of the way. I would say I got sort of different kinds of reactions. Collaborators and colleagues, sort of other faculty, the average reaction was, "You're doing what? Like, why did you choose to do that for a sabbatical? Why not, spend a year in Europe or in East Asia, working in a collaborator's lab?" At the sort of department chair, dean, provost, vice provost level, people were like, "Oh, that's a an interesting kind of career move. Could be fun things to do." The president and the provost of the university were like, "We are so happy that one of our faculty wants to participate in these programs." And I had the president of Cornell write a letter of recommendation for me. So you'll get different reactions depending on who you talk to at different levels of an organization. I agree, you want to make sure that this is something that slots in well with leave or sabbatical or other kind of policies. I had gotten our department and college to agree while I applied for this fellowship that I would go on sabbatical if it was awarded. And if not, I would push my sabbatical off a year, apply again, and then if it still didn't get awarded, I would go. But otherwise, I would, push off and have a second round of trying to apply.
Very interesting. I want to piggyback on something that ConSandra mentioned. She mentioned affinity groups. So part of the fellowship program is not only your placement in your particular host office, but there is a robust professional development curriculum, which is done by a 2-week orientation program where all the fellows who are housed at all the different organizations are together for 2 weeks. That is kind of like everything you always wanted to know about Washington but didn't learn because you were taking all your science classes. And it's, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but as an alum of the program, for me, it was a tremendous experience to go through orientation. I learned so much, and from people that I would never have access to. So that is the beginning of the fellowship, and it's also an opportunity for the fellows to meet each other and to really form a tight network. And then throughout the course of the year, there are professional development courses in leadership skills and science policy. This year, there was actually one I was thinking when you all were talking about the writing, there was a class on how to write an op-ed. And also during orientation, there was a section on how to write a one-page memo. So I'm sure that you all have to write one-page memos in your time in the government. So there's a professional development curriculum that lasts throughout the year. And part of that is there are fellow-led affinity groups. So ConSandra mentioned fellows over 40 or fellows over 50 group. There's also, you know, a neuroscience group. There is a AI affiliated group. There's an R users group. There is an improvisation group. You know, there's a global health group, and depending on different fellows' interests, they self-organize and have programming as well. And each year there are a handful of symposia put on by the affinity group. So this year there was an AI symposium and also an environmental justice symposium that was put on by these affinity groups. So that's another opportunity that you would have available to you as a fellow. All right. Now let's turn to the back side of the fellowship, if you will, returning to your organization. So Jessica, what was it like for you to return to your organization? What did you bring back to your institution?
So let's see. Since I was in an office that really focuses on humanities and the social sciences. I mean, it was an international relations office. I was one of 2 scientists. The rest of the people were all like historians and international relations folks. Because of that, I came back better able to mentor a broader range of students, or in my case, cadets. I could talk to my history majors in a way that I wouldn't normally be able to talk with them. I feel really comfortable talking to my engineers and my physicists and my mathematicians, but this gave me, it gave me street cred and authenticity to talk with all of my students as opposed to just half of my students. And that also let me give better career advice, particularly those going into the military, that, you know, there were certain areas that they didn't know existed, certain jobs that are available for folks in the military, and having spent that time in the Pentagon in an area that wasn't just science-y, that helped. It also, the fellowship helped me realize that I really am in a very tiny pond. And I love that challenge of learning. So I've gone and I've asked my dean, like, hey, I need a growth assignment. I need something bigger. And it's not clear exactly what that's going to look like. So I'm actually looking at possibly other opportunities as well. Like, I think I need something bigger. I need a bigger challenge. I need to be able to grow in ways that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do here. So.
Great, thanks. How about you, Chris? How did you reintegrate into your faculty position, and how did the experience on the Hill impact you?
Yeah, well, when I came back to Cornell, my goal was always to spend 1 year, 1 sabbatical year in DC, and then come back to Cornell, and so things felt fairly natural. I did bring a lot back to Cornell with me, though. So when I came back to Cornell, I've launched a course that I've taught every year since I was a fellow, called Science Policy from Concept to Conclusion. In many ways, in the course, I try to model the fellowship experience for students. So student teams of scientists identify an issue at the intersection of science and public policy they care about, learn a lot about it through guided reading and scheduled interviews and things like that with policymakers. They write a National Academy style report about it, make a decision about where they think the policy should go, and then start developing the kinds of materials that would be necessary to shift policy, including draft legislation, op-eds, social media campaigns. And then at the end of the term, we take advantage of the fact that government is so open in this country, and we go live, not necessarily with the goal of trying to affect policy change, although there have been some groups that have done that, but rather with giving these students an opportunity to see what it feels like and what it's, and what the meetings and things like that are like when you try to engage with the government to advocate for policy changes. So that course has really been a highlight of my teaching since I've come back. It's a lot of fun to teach. It's like every semester I'm running an NGO with 5 or 6 new issues, or every year. The course started out with like 15 people. It's grown dramatically. I teach it with 45 to 50 people every spring, spread between about a third are juniors and seniors in various departments. About a third or so are PhD students from STEM disciplines all across the university. And about a third are professional students, folks in master public health programs and things like that here at Cornell. I also participated in a training grant application with a number of other faculty here at Cornell for what was called the Broadening Experiences in Scientific Training program, funded by the National Institutes of Health. Our grant aimed to sort of do 2 things. One, to try to help graduate students and postdocs in STEM disciplines become aware of the broad variety of careers in our society and economy where their skills are needed. And a lot of this is just bringing people in who can talk about what they do in the world as a scientist. And then we developed tracks for people who had an affinity to a particular career that would include didactic courses like my course in science policy. It would include helping to establish mentor networks, helping to connect people with folks for informational interviews, for summer internships, things like that. So I've run a track. We have tracks in kind of entrepreneurship and risk analysis and management and science and law, but we have a track in one in science communication, but we have a track in science policy that I've kind of run for this Broadening Experiences in Scientific Training program since I came back from the experience. And that program has now been institutionalized within our graduate school with full staff lines that are supporting initiatives and helping to develop new ones. So I would say, if you sort of take this attitude that, you're gonna take what you know as a scholar and an academic, and you're gonna do the best you can, in Washington, D.C. for a year, you can also take this attitude that you're just gonna learn as much as you can while you're down there and see what sticks when you come back to your institution. In my case, it was a fantastic training grant that's become a standard part of our of the way that we recruit, train, and mentor graduate students at Cornell, and a class on science policy, which has actually seeded a number of new AAAS Fellows in both the Congressional and Executive branch.
Thanks, Chris. And ConSandra, since you're going to be, since you're still here doing your fellowship, can you talk about how you're thinking about life after the fellowship?
Well, yes, as of today, I am returning back to my institution starting in August. However, I am making headway with some federal government positions, so we'll see how it goes. I've turned down some positions with a few private companies and a couple think tanks. I have decided to pursue a career in the federal government, so wish me luck. I'm headed that way.
All right, excellent, ConSandra.
Yeah.
So one final question for each of the panelists is, what do you wish someone had told you before you applied? Who would like to take that first?
I'll take it. I'll start. I wish someone could have told me how significant of a role this fellowship would have played in my life, in my career. It's not written. It's been like a rebirth, a transformational experience for me. As I mentioned before, I became a practitioner during my experience as a fellow, from the professional development activities, which are all great, like Jennifer mentioned, from TED Talk, you name it, we have been exposed to it. Affinity group involvement, volunteer activities, networking, and I mean, this is not written. It's written, but to explain, to really just explain your experience, it's just unbelievable. It's been unbelievable for me. Also, I've gained extended, diverse family members. You know, we assist each other, we job talk, we share resumes, and this is even with the alumni, you know, base. We had happy hour, you need a place to stay, the exercise buddies. Those things are not written, and so, you know, it was told to us, but you have to experience for yourself. And I've had the best past 2 years that I could ever imagine from a 23-year career as an academician. And I take nothing, Jennifer, Jessica, and Chris, for this journey. I have really, so no one never told us how great up, and I'm just not exaggerating. This is a great place to be. It is a great fellowship, and at any part, any phase of your academic career. And I'll digress there. I'll stop.
All right, Jessica, you want to take a stab at it?
Sure. I second what ConSandra said. It's so powerful and so awesome. But I think for me, what I wish somebody had told me at the beginning was a reality check with respect to my own institution. So, I mean, I had seen online things like what Chris was saying about, you know, his senior administration being so excited. I had seen things like on, you know, the splash page of harvard.edu, oh, we have 2 AAAS fellows this year, or, you know, just these really exciting announcements. And I thought for sure that my institution would be excited about it and would know how to leverage it. And what I instead faced was a lot of frustration, a lot of resistance, a lot of not understanding what it was. And so if you are the first from your institution to be aware of that, and to know that that means that you can carve your own path. I mean, I have since been able to, I think, for most of the people that I work with, convince them that it's good. I've been able to, you know, I also have come back and taught a science policy course now. I've been able to change the assignments. I've been able to get myself onto different committees that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to do because I have this. But I had to do that work, and I think that I would have liked to have been braced that it was going to be up to me to convince my school that it was good. So that's what I wish I had known in advance.
All right, Chris, how about you?
You know, people talked about something called Potomac fever, and I always thought that was some kind of, you know, I don't know, I didn't believe it. But I have to say, after being in DC for a few months, you know, it's almost like you can feel the weight of the power that you hold in your hand. And there is a sort of intoxicating feeling of being able to exercise that power for good. And I have to say, it was I'm a committed scientist. If I was a somewhat committed scientist, I could imagine this as being something that could have pulled me away from a career. And people had told me that before. I think it's sort of what ConSandra was saying in the sense of it being very transformative. But I found it surprising. And for me, the specific thing was just this proximity to the ability to be able to exercise enormous resources to go after problems that I cared deeply about.
Oh, those are some really great responses. I'm so appreciative to all of our panelists for being here today, and to all of the attendees. We're grateful for your participation. The fellowship is a pivot point in many different careers for many different alumni. It's a truly unique experience, and our country needs you. There are hard problems to solve. We need strong minds to solve them. the fellowship is is kind of a unique situation both for our fellows and for the government hosts, and it can be really impactful, and I hope that you will consider applying. At the on the slide here on the screen, you can see ways to stay in touch with us. Please do. And I'd like to thank just one last time both our panelists and also the STPF staff who have set up this webinar, Jessica Soul and Zach Everett, and give everyone a round of applause. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.